rise up in the morning beneath the stars so bright. Pull your hat down, make sure your cinch is tight. Horses kinda snuffy, cold chill up your spine. You'll get your ass moving, son, with burning daylight.
Howdy there, I'm Matt McKinley and we're burning daylight.
In the saddle till the job's done right.
Welcome to Burning Daylight, the only podcast for the working cowboy. Well, howdy there, daylight burners. How's it going? Hopefully spring is kind of rolling into your country. Finally, it's been a long time coming here for us out in Nevada, but we're about there. I think maybe the was Doug, the guy I work with. He always said winter ain't dead yet, but his back's broke, and I think we're kind of at that point now. We've been there for a little bit, but I gotta apologize to you for not putting out any new episodes here recently. I've been kind of slacking on content, but I've also been somewhat lacking on inspiration, I suppose, and so I'm gonna try to remedy that a little bit and get you some more episodes out here in the near future. But I've kind of noticed that I had a stretch there for a while, whereas I had guests all the time, but also looked back and I was like, it was also during COVID, so people weren't going a lot of different places. Everything was shut down, so maybe people didn't have anything else to do. But now, it's like, people are busy, and so it's been a little tough to get people lined up. But we'll remedy that here lately. But as far as the inspiration goes, I had a really, really good piece of inspiration, and it all started by Brett Davis. I don't know where. I guess he got his idea from the movie Smoke Signals, which I've not seen. Anyway, I'll put. So Brett posted this on Facebook here about a week ago, and he said, "Hey Victor, tell me about your dad." And he said, if anyone that hasn't seen that movie should, but seriously, I want you all to tell me about your dad. And then he said, I'll start. And he went into his, and I'll read that here in a minute. But I thought this was a great idea. Here in, I don't know if you'd say the past, I don't know how long you'd say, but at least 5-10 years, like, we've had this rise of, this bitching about toxic masculinity, white men are the root of all problems, and blah, 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 blah. And if you haven't noticed, our society has gotten awful soft, like alarmingly soft over the past, I don't, and if you talk to older people, it's been going on longer than even the past 5-10 years, but particularly in my adult lifetime, like men have got really soft, and it makes you wonder how much of that is due to the fact that we just we don't value men like people did in other times, and I don't know. So, but there's something to be said about having a strong masculine man in your life, and I mean, you can, if you look at some of the stuff that people bitch about, particularly on the sexuality side of things, whether it be homosexual or transgender, bisexual, non-binary, all the and then there's a big, I won't even say if it's a big backlash, but anyway, there's a backlash against like porn and just overall sexualization of our culture. A lot of that stems back, seems like, from not having a strong male role model or father figure type deal. So I thought this was a really cool thread that was started, and and I texted. Well, then Cliff Chat also wrote one and those are the two that I read. So if there's others out there, I'm sure there are. I'd like to hear them, honestly. And I'm going to tell you about mine. I texted both Brett and Cliff on this deal, and I said I'd like to read yours aloud. And I'm too long winded to, and I'm not much of a typer. I mean, I can, but I don't care to. And also I got two dads that I got to talk about. So I'm gonna talk about them here. But to start it off, so Brett says, hey Victor, tell me about your dad. Anyone that hasn't seen the movie should, but seriously, I want you all to tell them about your dad. I'll start. And he says, my dad wears his heart on his sleeve. If he loves you, he tells you, and he does so with supreme indifference to the consequences. If he doesn't like you, he tells you with the same indifference. He's one of the few people I've met in my life that truly loves others. He will fight like a buzzsaw at the drop of a hat and is willing to forgive any trespass. He is an artist that works hard at his craft and loves to work his craft and loves to improve it. He focuses on the tiny details of his work, and it shows in the product. He taught me to love art and nature and the violence in both. He is loud, he can be obnoxious, and he isn't funny. He sometimes makes rash decisions without thinking about them. Sometimes overthinks small things. He lives what he believes. Please tell me about your dad, even if he isn't or wasn't your dad. Tell me about the man that filled that role. Tell me the good, tell me the bad. Long or short, I want to read about the men that raised you. Even if I knew your dad well, tell me what you knew. And so I really liked that. Good and the bad and faults, all of it. I like that. And Cliff said, tell me about your dad. I took this idea from my good buddy, Brett Davis. Here goes. He says, my dad is to this day one of the strongest men I've ever met. He's the kind of man that always carries a knife. He's loving and kind to a fault. He'll give you the shirt off his back and never knows a stranger. He's hot-tempered, and at times he's impatient, yet also the most patient at other times. My dad is brave and never runs from a fight. He will defend the weak. He's funny, corny at times, but always has good advice to give, and he knows how to listen. My dad is a craftsman, taking great pride in what he does. He taught me work ethic and how to be polite and professional. He taught me to drive and taught me to hunt. Music is a big part of my father's life at his outset. Music is a big part of my father's life. It's his outlet. He can express emotion and truly let loose the burdens of life when he loses himself in the music. I remember as a kid complaining about dad playing and practicing. Now I treasure those memories. My dad truly loves people and wants to know everything about everybody. As kids, my brother and I warned our friends that my dad would hit them with 20 questions as soon as they walked in. It's always a joke between us. I'm the man today because my dad treated me as a man from early on, encouraging me to make my own decisions and face my fears. He pushed us to do dangerous things with bravery, clarity, always letting my brother and I know that we had what it took to do anything. My dad is a great dad and an even better grandfather. Is the quintessential country grandpa, always teaching his grandkids about all things country and farm living. Whether it be shooting guns or fly fishing on the pond, my dad enjoys every moment of being a grandfather. My dad is the kind of guy who will yell at you, hand off a punishment, and 20 minutes later be taking you for ice cream. He was strict when he needed to be, but usually we only needed to hear stern talk from him because neither one of us ever wanted to disappoint him. He was always understanding that boys will be boys and things will get broken and we will drive too fast, too wild, through fistfights we got into growing up, brushes with the law, or just plain being wild boys. My dad was always understanding and helped us understand how to do better, but never took the spark out of us. I really like that a lot. I like this whole idea. Like I said, it's I think it's good to celebrate the strong men in your life because they make a huge impact, and that's It's one of the reasons I've slowed down a little bit on the podcast side of things is my kids are growing up and I got to be around. Yeah, that's part of the whole deal is you got to be there. And like there's scientific studies that show that education um revolves around having involved parents, and we've got a lot of single moms in the world, and particularly in the cowboy world too. And for whatever reason, it's not necessarily a good thing. I understand there's abusive relationships and whatever, but it all comes back to like men got to do better, and we got to have some sort of incentive for them to do better, for all that to take, to change a culture into you gotta. I mean, in my position, anyways, or my thoughts and viewpoints is, well, like I can't bitch about all the shitty men in the world and then raise one that turns out to be shitty my own self. So it starts with ownership, and you gotta take hold of that, and you gotta do what was taught for you. Like take the stuff that your dad taught you, the good stuff and the bad stuff, and use that to give your kids, particularly if you got boys. I mean, girls, it's important with them too, but this is a show focused at the men, and particularly raising other strong men. So let me tell you about my dad. I've got a different situation than a lot of people. Some it might sound a little bit similar to, but probably not exactly alike. I wouldn't say I'm a unique situation, but I'm more unique than a lot of people that I know. And because of that, though, I've managed to collect a number of father figures over the years, and but there's two that I call my dad. We got my biological dad, who, well, he died when I was a sophomore in high school, if I remember correctly. I was placed in foster care when I was 9 years old, and from about 9 till I was, I believe, 13 or 14. It was, well, that wasn't, it also makes me very thankful for being raised in a rural community, rural county, because when you hear about some of the horror stories that comes out of the foster system, particularly in the big cities, I mean, it's no joke. I mean, it's an absolute shit show, and rural social services aren't much better. But that being said, it seems like I turned out fairly okay considering the situation. And honestly, I didn't have, as far as the foster homes I was involved, or I stayed at. I really don't have many complaints about it. Like I've got complaints about the whole situation, but the people themselves that took me in, I got nothing but good things to say about them. Honestly, they were all fine people, and I believe trying to do a good job. But my biological dad was a Vietnam vet. He was drafted out of high school, went into the Army in 1968, served, I believe, 2 tours, maybe 3 over. I think I've got his records. I'm still waiting on his replacement medals and decorations and citations and all that he had. But I know he had a Vietnam combat badge with 2 stars on it. So he did 2 tours, 2 different campaigns in Vietnam, and he was a career Army guy. He did 2 enlistments he was drafted, re-enlisted, and then later did right around 20 years in the Colorado National Guard. Retired in 1993, and outside of the military, he didn't have a great go at life. Suffered with a lot of PTSD. I don't know particularly any of the details related to it, but I know he had some real issues that all you know started with his experience there, his deployments in Vietnam. Um, I was pretty young when I left there, so I don't remember a ton about him. But what I do know is he was super proud of me. I was his boy. I was his only biological son. He had a couple daughters from a previous marriage who I'd never met, and then my older biological sister, my younger biological sister. So I was kind of his pride and joy. Loved sports, loved the army, loved the United States of America. He was I don't know how smart of a man he was. He was not very well educated, had a high school education, and then had quite a bit of worldly education. Um, Outside of that, I don't really know. Like I said, I was pretty young when I left there, and then he died when I was in high school. So there's a lot of unquestions and or a lot of questions left unanswered, and there's some searching for answers on my part to this day still. So it's one of those things that I don't focus on a whole lot, but there's no doubt he left a pretty big impression on me. I can remember from a very very early age wanting to be in the army, in the military of some sort. And at one point, I was on I was on a path to joining the Marine Corps, and due to a bunch of different circumstances, I suppose. But the main one being my eyesight, which I cut my eye with a pocket knife when I was 9, playing army man. So the thing that I wanted to do the most also led to me being not able to serve in the military as well. So it's kind of a little ironic little oxymoron. Well, not oxymoron, but a nice little bit of irony for you. Little look into the life of your favorite podcast host, Matt McKinley. But from there, I went to foster home in well, it was kind of out in the country. I was only there for a couple weeks, and I lived with a pastor and his family for oh 6 months or so over in Springfield, Colorado, and then eventually I was moved over to where I grew up in Walsh with my now, who I consider my parents, the ones that adopted me. So Wes McKinley took me in when I was 10 years old. I'd been living there for maybe a month. I don't know. It's a weird feeling being a foster kid. Let me tell you, it's you don't really kind of fit in anywhere. Like you're just there. You're just going wherever the system pushes you, and so it was a cultural experience because my folks lived about 20 miles south of Walsh, which is a pretty small town, but compared to where I was born, where I was raised up to that point, Campo, Colorado, it's even smaller than that. So, but it's all within the same county, Baca County, Colorado, little bitty Dust Bowl county, and that's where my story led me to West McKinley, and been there about a month, and still trying to figure out the routine. I had to get on the school bus, and it was about an hour from when we got picked up to when we got dropped off at school. We were depending on who all rode the bus that day, we were the second or the third people on the bus. Our route started just south of us and picked up kids all the way along into town. You guys, I'm sure you know how a bus route works, but so that was a change, where going from walking to school to having to ride the bus for about an hour. But I met a lot of good friends on that. I also had farm chores to do. We lived on a little farm, little ranch operation there. It was my dad's cowboying for the most part. Like, he ran some cows of his own, pretty small herd, mostly for for personal beef, and then to sell some box beef to customers. Uh, he sold to some kind of high end restaurants in Colorado Springs and Santa Fe. Um, but he just my dad's kind of a weird fella. Wes McKinley is a little bit eccentric, is what people have been known to call him quite a bit. Threw me on a horse for the first time. The first time I don't know if I'd even been on the ponies at the fair up to that point. I maybe had, but I was also, with my biological dad, that family, we were really poor, like real poor. My dad was in the army, and then, well, I guess the National Guard at the time, which doesn't pay a whole lot. And then he was also worked at an old folks home in Boise City, Oklahoma. He had his last assignment in the National Guard. His troop or his unit got deployed to the Persian Gulf War. He's in a medical unit, and yeah, so that's what he used in his civilian life. I maybe had been on the ponies at the fair, but I don't know if I had. And yeah, so my dad throws me on a horse. Wes McKinley does, and we go on about a 25 mile ride through the canyons, through Picture Canyon, that area, southeast Colorado, which is it's a pretty tough country. It's the canyon country, so you got driving along on the plains, flat as a pancake, see forever seems like, and then all of a sudden you drop down about 200-300 feet in these sandstone canyons, and then it's pretty rough, rocky, brushy country. A lot of cedar trees, a lot of yucca plants, a lot of I'm not sure the cactuses you call them, but they're kind of like I don't know if it's like a Joshua tree, but they're like a bush cactus. They're, I don't know, maybe an inch in diameter, about yay long, and just branches all over the place. And I'm not sure I can't remember the name of those cactus, but all in all, like, not the roughest country I ever rode in, but it's definitely not the easiest. It's not your normal little trail ride that my dad would take us on. And I didn't know anything about a horse, not a goddamn thing. And boy, you talk about being sore after, because a lot of that ride was covered at a long trot, a lot of it, and so I just bounced up there like a sack of potatoes, and my ass was raw and sore, and then I come down with the flu, and it put a hurting on me, and I was pretty sure that I was never getting on a horse again. But little did I realize I didn't have much choice in that matter, so got back on a horse a lot, and well, now I make my living a horseback. So it's funny how this new situation and this new circumstance, and then what later became to be my new dad, led me to where I am today. And that path was pretty rocky at times. Like my dad and I, like, we only screamed at each other, I think, once in my entire life, and that was when one of the steers that we were feeding at the house. So either somebody left the gate open, or I think there was a hole in the fence, maybe. I can't remember exactly, but steer got out in the yard, and we were trying to get him put back in on foot, and I wasn't very good at reading cattle at the time. My dad was, well, still to this day, not very good at giving directions in a gentlemanly way. He was kind of an asshole about it, and he still can tend to be that way. So the wind was howling as well. So by the time before we finally got this steer pushed back up into the corrals, we were screaming at each other from across the yard with our hands on our hips, just yelling "fuck you." And never came to blows, but also we were across the yard from each other, so it was. I don't know. I've never seen my dad fight. I've never heard of him getting in any sort of physical altercation, but I would assume the old man could have handled himself back in the day. Could be wrong. I don't know. Never had to find out. Uh, what my dad did do with great effect was kick your ass mentally. He has a way of giving you an offhand compliment that you don't realize is an insult till you're already walking away from him, and then you're like, "That son of a bitch." My dad liked to challenge you in your positions. If you had a really strong opinion about something, even if he didn't care about it, he would pick away at your argument. And I always thought he was just being petty by it, and so maybe sometimes he was. I don't know. He just kind of likes to argue, and that's part of where I get my temperament too. But he also had a way of honing your skills, your critical thinking, your reasoning, your logic, and he made me able to defend my positions pretty vigorously, and also to realize when my position was wrong. To look at facts, look at reason, and decide, does your point still hold up? And that's been a very valuable thing for me throughout my life, and I appreciate that a great deal. My dad has, through some fault of his own, but most of it through no fault of his own, come to enjoy a kind of some flavor of celebrity throughout rural Colorado. He was a 4-term member of the Colorado House of Representatives. District 64 was his district at the time. It's been redrawn since, but he ran as a Democrat. He was recruited actually by the Republican Party to run against at the time a 3-term incumbent. But even prior to that, in the early 90s, he was selected for a federal grand jury that was called to determine whether or not forget the name of the company, but there was a nuclear bomb manufacturing plant near Rocky Flats, Colorado, outside of Denver. And while they didn't build the actual nuclear bombs there, I believe I should probably have my dad on to discuss this case a little more. I know we talked about it some in the past, but he wrote a book about it, and it was a pretty big deal. But I believe this particular plant manufactured plutonium triggers, which were then placed on the actual nukes themselves, and so they were what helped detonate a nuclear bomb. And long story short, there was a lot of pollution involved, and a lot of cover-ups by the government and the company that ran the factory, and it was a big kind of environmental disaster. And due to that, and all there was FBI whistleblowers, there were people that were kind of blackmailed, or there was some real shady stuff done in that whole thing. And a lot of it he's not able to talk about because it's a federal grand jury, so it's all all sealed once it's said and done. So he ran for the U.S. House of Representatives in 1996. He ran as an independent candidate, did not win, but he made somewhat of a name for himself because he campaigned the whole district, which goes from the southern border of Colorado at the Oklahoma Panhandle, the eastern border of Kansas and Nebraska, and then all the way up to the Wyoming border on the north side of that whole eastern side of the state. It was in his district, and he rode somewhere around 1,500 miles campaigning, mostly on his mule Marvin. who was later endorsed by the Greeley Tribune, I believe, as being the only candidate worthwhile because they didn't like the Republican, they didn't like the Democrat, and then they thought my dad stood no chance because he was an independent, and even though they liked his policies, so they endorsed Marvin the Mule as the main candidate for, I think that was U.S. or Colorado District 4 for the U.S. House of Representatives. I want to say he ended up with about 2% of the vote, but he made a name for himself, and later on, I believe it would have been 2002 is when he was recruited by the Colorado Republicans to run against their incumbent. So, mind you, this was the Republican Party that did not like their own representative in that district, who they thought was corrupt and um, just not a good representative. Probably a pretty good politician, but not so much on the representative side. So they recruited him. He ran as a Democrat. Kind of, uh, I don't. I know they grew up Democrat. Mentioned the Dust Bowl being a Dust Bowl county. Talked about the Dust Bowl quite a bit, but it made a huge impact on on my grandparents who lived through it. My dad, who was born at the tail end of it, going into the 50s, which weren't much better in that part of the world, and it really kind of shocked the culture around that part of the world. It was it really made a big impact on it, and because of that, there was a lot of kind of FDR Democrats that were in that part of the world as the political landscape shifted and the district went mostly Republican. Now it's like solidly Republican. I think Trump got something like 95% of the vote in my county, in Baca County, in 2020. It's he became kind of a maverick. He had friends on both sides of the aisle, but was kind of hated by both parties. He has the Rocky Flats deal was not the first time he would take on the federal government, and in particular, the Department of Defense. He ran for state representative against a 3-term incumbent and lost in a pretty narrow race. Considering it was a 3-term incumbent, I think he ended up losing by 2 or 3%. So in the grand scheme of things, like fairly close race. Anyway, term limits are a thing in Colorado, so 4 terms and you're done in the House of Representatives. So I believe it was Brad Young who was the representative at the time, but he gets term limited. My dad runs again in 2004. Yeah, 2004, and ends up winning. So it was my freshman year of college. I had helped him campaign quite a bit leading up to that summer. That summer of 2004, I moved up to Loveland and then started college at CSU in Fort Collins. And so I didn't do a whole lot of active campaigning for him, but I did some around there on campus for the students that were from his district, and actually got to rub shoulders with some kind of high and mighty muckety mucks of the Colorado Democrat Party, and actually knew Ken Salazar. I wouldn't say well, but I was pretty familiar with Ken Salazar before he became kind of a high and muckety muck. He's now the ambassador to Mexico, I believe, is what his position is. But he was at the time he was running for Colorado senator, or for U.S. senator for Colorado, and ended up winning against Pete Coors. But I got to go to a couple different campaign events with him, or of his with my dad, and but anyway, my dad wins the race pretty handily. I don't think he ever come out of an election um, for state house with less than 55% of the vote. So in a very very heavy Republican district, he got elected 4 straight terms as a Democrat without a ton of like real competition. There was the last campaign in particular was pretty nasty. Um, there was this fairly wealthy lady from originally from California that ran against him, and she used a lot of this is as Obama was in office. I think it was during that first midterm. That would have been his last. Yeah, so he termed out in 2012. So his last election was in 2010, and that was the Tea Party wave. That was the Occupy Wall Street movement, which my dad being um, a little eccentric, but also being a man of the people, they had an Occupy movement there in Denver, and they camped out on one of the parks there. And my dad went and pitched his teepee with them and stood in solidarity. And of course, I was kind of your stock standard conservative Republican at the time, and I did not understand what he was up to. I didn't understand the whole Occupy Wall Street movement at all, Occupy movement in general. I didn't understand what their goals were, and it turns out my dad didn't either. He said, "I don't know what they're trying to prove. I don't think any of them there know what they're trying to do, but they're pissed off and they have a good reason to be, and they have a right to protest, and I'm going to support that right." So, uh, when he was in office in Denver, they usually went from January to May, or like first part of January to like the end of May. First part of June was when they were officially in session. They had committee meetings and stuff throughout the year, but that was the period of time that they got paid as a representative, was from January to May, and that was when they were in session. So when he did that, he would drive he'd drive up on Sunday morning. He'd leave, and he'd stay. He had this little studio apartment about a block and a half from the Capitol building. My mom called it the Prairie Dog Hole because it's kind of in a basement apartment, and it was dark. You go in the main door, and you have to go down a flight of stairs, and it was very dimly lit, and it was a downtown Denver, so it's an old part of the city, old building. Smelled pretty musty, and it's a nice enough place. But so he lived in this little apartment called that my mom called the Prairie Dog Hole, and he would stay there from Monday through Friday, and then he'd usually come home Friday night or Saturday morning. Um, when he got home, he had work to catch up on, so that means I was working outside. And like I said, most of this happened when I was in college, so I didn't have to deal with a ton of it. But I'd go home, and sometimes my dad would be there. Most of the time he'd be in Denver. I'd go visit him in Denver from time to time. But he was a busy man. Well, in that time when he was in office, particularly around I'd say like 07, 08 time, there was a plan by the U.S. Army Department of Defense to use eminent domain to essentially seize a bunch of ranches in Los Animas County, near the Pinyon Canyon maneuver site, and they wanted to expand that by it was over 1 million acres. I can't remember. It might have been 1.5 million, 1.8 million, something like that. But I don't remember the exact size. But it was a big chunk of land that they were getting ready to to seize through eminent domain. And while there was a lot of people involved fighting back against the government and the Army in particular, I say the Army, but it was the Department of Defense, but it was a U.S. Army site, and so they were the big people he was fighting against. And while there was a lot of people involved in that rallying, local ranchers, you know, environmental activists, property rights, private property rights activists, a lot of different people involved. But my dad was the spearhead. Wes McKinley led that charge, and it took several years, a lot of threats, a lot of really shady, underhanded deals. But he rallied enough support and got bipartisan consensus in both the House and the Senate. Got the governor, who at the time was John Hickenlooper. Is that right? Yeah, I think it was Hickenlooper. To sign it into law, but it essentially it revoked the state of Colorado's consent from the United States government to seize any of the state lands or any lands within the state to be used for anything other than like hospitals and post office, maybe a school. I don't know, but specifically, it revoked the right of consent to seize Colorado land for military purposes. And he was not popular with a lot of like your gung ho patriotic conservative uh, Republicans because they well, at the time, if you remember, 2010, Obama's still in there, and he ran on ending the war in Iraq and focusing on Afghanistan. Well, they wanted this site because the terrain was ideal for training troops to go fight in Afghanistan, which in itself was an unpopular war. Um, but when it came to federal politics, there was a lot of bipartisan consensus to just keep that thing going, and and how it typically works there on Capitol Hill is the Democrats want a bunch of money for social spending, the Republicans want a bunch of money for military spending, and the compromise is we spend money on both, and at either different ways they pay for it, borrow the money, or they print more money, and anyway, it's all part of this nonsense that's got America to where we are right now. And this was just a little bitty slice of the pie that that was going on at that time with foreign policy, military policy, the military industrial complex. All of that was tied up in this little fight that my dad took to the army and eventually won. And it was funny watching him go through this because at the time I'm in the last couple of years of my college career, and I'm having a good time. I mean, like, I'm having a real good time. It's all being paid for by student loans that yeah, that I yeah, a typical college kid that has student loans, you're not thinking about paying them back or anything at the time. You're just there. I was there to get an education, I suppose, but um yeah, for the most part I was there to raise some hell, I was just typical college kid. And but even back then, I remember how passionate he was about this. And he said there's ranchers out there that, you know, they're, third, fourth, fifth generation in the same spot. That's been home for their family for many years, and they don't want to move, and they shouldn't have to move so that the army can gobble up this land and use their grazing pastures for, I don't know, maybe once a year they'll use it to do some big maneuver to train for a war that most of the country doesn't believe in. And he said it's just not right. Eminent domain is supposed to be used for the public good, and this in no way helps the general public. There was some ranchers that were willing to sell out. Probably they weren't doing so hot financially. I don't know for sure, but there was a pretty small, loud contingent there that just didn't want to go anywhere, and they should. And the way my dad thought is they shouldn't have to. this is this expanding this maneuver site for the army is not gonna result in a whole lot of new economic activity. Maybe once a year you have a bunch of troops down there that'll spend some money on in the local economy, but for the most part, it's just all those ranchers that have a hard enough time staying afloat are just they're just gone now, and now it's all behind a razor wire, and it's part of a protected military institution and or installation, and and then those ranchers who've been there for generations are just out on their head with a check for fair market value or whatever, and and at the end of the day, he just thought that it was a big injustice, and it wasn't right, and those people lived in his district, and it was his job as state representative to represent their voices before the Colorado legislature, and he took that job very, very seriously, and there was times where he probably I'd have to ask him about it. It's another one of those conversations that like we talked about it quite a bit, but I never really interviewed him on that topic, and maybe that'll have to be another episode for in the future. I got him hearing aids for Christmas, so he's a little better to talk to on the phone nowadays. So I guess it'd be a good time to have some of these conversations with him. But all in all, he viewed it as his job to represent the people of District 64 there in southeast Colorado, and these ranchers were part of that group. So he went to bat for him, and it got real ugly, and it was a hard won fight. But in the end, he raised enough hell, got enough people on his side, and got this pretty significant piece of legislature pushed through the House and the Senate, and later signed into law by the governor of Colorado, and was able to allow those people to just go on ranching like they always had been. I don't know how many of them are still in business. I don't know if any of them still are. I imagine a fair amount of them still are. But that's all irrelevant, because it was the decision to sell wasn't going to be left up to them. It was up to it was up to the U.S. military, and they had their way. That land was now theirs, and my dad didn't see it was right. He stood up for the people and won. He won a lot of close friends from that, but he also made a lot of political enemies. And throughout that whole time, there was one point he was named the second most corrupt politician in Colorado, because he refused to pay a fine for not reporting cash donations. And how he would raise money is he would go to a park or a church or community building, whatever, and he'd have a town hall. He'd throw a little free barbecue, so he'd grill hamburgers, hot dogs, and they'd play him and his buddies would play some cowboy music, and then he would get up and use the bully pulpit and tell what his policies were, what his plans were. Should he be reelected to the legislature? Shake hands, kiss babies, the whole thing. That was how he campaigned. And there was a donation. It was a Folgers coffee can at the end of the table where you made your plate, and all it was donations. Donations not required but encouraged, or but appreciated, something like that. And so we got a lot of checks, but a lot of cash. And cash is pretty much untraceable like that. And so there was no way he could possibly, unless somebody like penned a note with their name and whatever, all their information, so that he could officially file that as a campaign donation. Most of those people weren't able to, because it was just 5, 10, maybe a couple bucks here and there. And so there was, I don't know, a couple $1,000s or more, probably probably $5,000 to $10,000 that he raised that was untraceable. So he was fined something like $5,000 for not reporting. He refused to pay the fine, and I forget who the publication was, but he was named like the second most corrupt politician in Colorado that one year, and he kind of wears that as a badge of pride. He was also accused of sexual assault by a reporter who was dating a lobbyist who was trying to get him to vote for a bill that he was not about to vote for. And the allegations were all nonsense, but still, it was a pretty ugly time. As you can imagine, my mom was not real thrilled about the allegations, and I don't think there was ever any real concern that he is actually guilty of it on our side. But still, you get your name run through the mud. It's not a real pleasant deal, particularly on something like that. But he was able to weather the storm. He left office in 2012. My mom died from breast cancer in 2011, and he took it pretty hard. They were just shy of their 48th year of being married, and they were high school sweethearts. And he was very, very proud of my mom. Like he adored her, and he took it pretty hard. He still had some unfinished business in Denver, even though he was kind of a lame duck representative. It was his last term limited out, but he still had work to finish. And I won't lie, he got a little sloppy there towards the end of his political career. It was also kind of it was a shift in the politics of Colorado. We had a huge influx of people from California and like Illinois and New York. Maybe not so much New York, but there was a lot of like Illinois and California in particular. And all of a sudden, where his whole career in the House, he had been in the minority party, being a Democrat. Now the balance of power had swung, but the Democrat Party that he was a part of was getting increasingly more progressive and kind of just ultra left wing. And and he had been, well, 6-7 years in state politics at that point, and had found out pretty quickly that it was a real dirty business, and it was hard to get anything passed through, no matter how much sense it made, all how good of a bill you had. It was about whose ass you wanted to kiss, and it was a rough time on him there those last couple of years in office. Since then, he is kind of, for the most part, stayed around the home place. He still raises hell. He's still fighting his water wars. All in all, like, my dad's a good leader. He's a guy that is not afraid of a fight. Said I've never heard about him physically being in an altercation. Maybe outside of his brothers. He was the oldest of six brothers that that were all born at the years leading out of the Dust Bowl, to a pretty poor family, but a very strong together family. They're very, very tight knit, and they talk to each other all the time. All the brothers. There's Uncle Bob passed here a couple of years ago, but they're all close. They stay in contact. They visit with each other, and they're very close knit. They love each other very much, and that's, my dad's got a lot of acquaintances and a lot of buddies, but he's only got a handful of close friends, and they're people that he's known his entire life for the most part. He is loyal to a fault. Sometimes he makes some decisions that I have a hard time understanding. Uh, and when he makes them, more often than not, though, as time goes on, you're like, oh, I see why he did that. Makes a lot of sense now. And he's a very wise individual. I I've never called my dad dumb. I've never called him stupid, and I've never had any reason to. He's a very intelligent man. Um, he graduated with a bachelor's degree from Oklahoma Panhandle State University, with a degree in mathematics and a minor in physics. Taught school for a couple years, um, and then he went on to do a number of different things. He drove truck for a while. He still does some work in the oil field business for a small drilling company. Um, there's a lot of time spent in the pickup in silence, going from gas well to gas well, helping my dad either start pump jacks or take readings, move pipe. He was a pretty decent welder. Like he wasn't a pipeline welder. He's not at nowhere. I don't know if he had a certification at one point. I think when he started welding, you didn't need a certification. But he's a pretty good welder, fabricator. He loves 78, 79 Ford pickups. He's got a whole bunch of them. Typically, only one runs at a time. He has upgraded his collections of Ford pickups over the years as parts get harder to find for some of those older ones, and as they just get more and more wore out. I mean, we had this one. It was a 3/4 ton. I believe that one was what they called the Ranger back in the day. That was it was a F-250, and that thing had to have 500,000 miles on it, I would think. And like I said, it didn't always run, but he liked that, particularly the inline six, the 300 cubic inch inline six motor. It was that and the 460. Those were his favorite motors. He knew how to still knows how to work on them. He's a little crippled up in his old age. He just turned 79, and he's definitely slowed down a lot here in the last couple of years as age has started to catch up to him. But he's very, very sharp, and now he's able to hear regularly again with his new hearing aids, and he feels like he's back in the fight. You know, he's still dealing with this water crisis that we have in southeast Colorado, and he appears to be making some headway. And a lot of that has to do with just sheer persistence and an intellect on his part. He's become somewhat of a of a lawyer. Um, he's filed his own briefs. He's filed his own objections. He was held in contempt of court due to a bunch of legal wrangling and whatnot. But because of that, he got a lot of attention at the state level, and it seems like maybe there's some actual progress being excuse me, being made on this water issue. And once again, while there's a lot of people involved and have helped over the years that he's been doing it, he's been the spearhead on the attack. He's the one to lead the charge because he knows it's important, and if he doesn't do it, nobody else will. And I think he's kind of the ideal attitude that I look for in a political representative, is somebody who doesn't really want the job, but sees that nobody worthwhile is willing to step up, and sometimes that's what a leader does. A leader leads, and I think my dad is a very, very underrated leader of men, and I'm very proud of him, and I'm in the long run, I'm very grateful that him and my mom took me and my sister in when they did. And I don't know how I would have turned out had it not been for them. And it could have been good, could have been bad. I really don't know. If I look at how my biological dad ended up there towards the end, you know, I wouldn't want to end up like him. And chances are I would have. And so it's it's always a big what if question. What if this would have happened? What if that would have happened? But I don't know. I ended up being the son of Wesley McKinley, and I'm very grateful for that. So that's my dad, and I want to hear about yours. If you got a good story about this, you can email me. It's Matt at burnin-daylight.com. That's burnin-daylight.com. You can email them. You can post them on Facebook and tag me. You can DM me on Facebook or Instagram. I got my Instagram handle there. That's probably the easiest way to reach me on social media. Instagram's the one I use the most. But tell me about your dad. I want to hear about him, and I will try to read as many of them as I can on another episode for Father's Day. And I would love to hear about your dads. The good, the bad, what he taught you, what he means to you. I like to get to know my audience. I consider you all friends at this point, particularly the folks who've been listening the whole time. But I want to hear about your dads. Dads don't get enough credit nowadays, and this little I don't know what you call it, experiment, thread, whatever, this little deal that Brett Davis started and then Cliff Shad continued, I think is really cool. And as a dad myself, trying to be a good one, I'd like to hear about more of yours, so I can learn from the man you learned from, indirectly at least. And who knows what little nuggets of wisdom you can find from somebody else that you can incorporate in your own life and your own journey as a man, as a dad. So tell me about your dad. I want to hear about him, and I can't wait to read about him and do a whole nother episode for Father's Day. So thanks, Brett Davis and Cliff Schatt, for allowing me to read yours on the podcast. I think is an excellent little exercise, and I'm excited to see what you guys have to say about yours. So thanks for tuning in. Hope you all are enjoying the warm weather if you have it, and if you don't worry. Climate change hasn't changed that much yet. Spring is coming, so hang in there and move your ass. We're burning daylight.
Your eyes up in the morning, beneath the stars so bright. Pull your hat down, make sure your cinch is tight. Horses kinda snuffy, cold chill up your spine. We'll get your ass moving, son, we're burning daylight. Burning daylight. Burning daylight. In the saddle till the job's done right. Just together, and you won't catch 'em all. But when you ride through the gate, make sure you sit up tall. I can see the horizon, it's looking pretty bright. Well, get your ass moving, son, we're burning daylight. Burning daylight. Burning daylight. In the saddle till the job's done right. Burning daylight. Burning